Today I'm going to talk about the elements of drama. So a play is a beautiful piece of art. A play is in one respect a written piece of literature. Yet that written piece of literature is meant to be seen and heard. I'm going to encourage everyone, if you haven't already, just see a play. Go out and see a play. It doesn't matter what kind of play. It can be a children's theater play or it can be, a Broadway play. But to experience a play, you really get a feeling of art in a new way. Because of the story of a play, you're trying to piece together all the parts. You're piecing together the character and the staging and the irony, and all of that is being seen through your eyes and your ears, and you're experiencing it on a different level than just reading. So for the purposes of this semester, we need to read the plays, but we have to somehow try to think about how that story would be seen, okay? So as we go through the elements of drama, you don't want to think about an element as an isolated piece. Particularly for drama, all these pieces work together. So the characters work with the staging, and the staging works to help promote the plot. Okay, they all build on each other. All of these elements are connected to help us get what is that story about? What are we supposed to learn? If the story is about poverty, what are we supposed to learn about poverty? If the story is about the American dream, what are we supposed to learn about the American dream? How does the character's action help promote this idea about the American dream, right? What are we saying about the American dream? What are we saying about tragic heroes? You're going to read a lot of plays this semester that have tragic heroes. Well, what do we learn about the tragic hero? Just identifying the tragic hero is not enough, okay? Because the story is not just about a tragic hero. It's about what's going on around the character. What visually is happening around us, okay? So as we go through the elements of drama, you want to think about their connections, how they work together, and how they work together in a visual way. So theorists categorize plays as tragedy or comedy. Now, what constitutes a tragedy? Well, various theorists present different ideas about the definition of a tragedy. I think you and I can kind of agree that a tragedy is something sad. The story does not end in a happy way. The characters have a major downfall. Okay? Now, Aristotle says that the catastrophe results from a flaw in the character of the hero. So the protagonist is leading the downfall. Another theorist says the hero's tragic flaw results from fate or coincidence. So it's kind of beyond the character's control that sort of the world and the forces around the character are causing sort of bad things to happen. Finally, the third point, another theorist says that tragedy results from an error in judgment committed by the hero. So the weakness of the tragic hero. These are three different points about tragedy. But in general, the consensus is that a tragedy is the result of when the result of the protagonist, his or her downfall. When the protagonist falls, everything and everyone around that character falls as well. And the story does not end in happiness. There's usually some type of death or mutilation or just complete utter devastation. Okay? So what is the definition of a tragic hero? Again, Aristotle claims that tragic heroes are grand and noble characters, and their tragedy crushes not only the tragic hero, but the other related heroes as well. Again, when there is a tragedy, the protagonist, the tragic hero, has a huge downfall, and the house around him or her falls as well. Now, there's this word called recognition. That's another way to say discovery. It's a key element in a tragedy. We like to say that a tragic hero, there's usually a moment of recognition. That tragic hero realizes what has happened to him and he or she can't escape. And that is the major downfall, that the world has just crashed down on the tragic hero. And the world is suffocating him or her, and it's pretty much over. So that's not exactly happy. I think the major difference between comedy and tragedy is the audience response. So in a tragedy, the audience wants to cry for the characters, but in a comedy, the audience wants to laugh with the characters or even laugh at the characters. It's important to note that tragedy and comedy share certain elements, right? The characters have discovery scenes, there are reversals in fortune, errors in judgment, and we see human weakness and failure. But in a tragedy, when we see a human weakness and sort of an ultimate failure, we feel so sad for that character, and he or she has fallen into a deep abyss and he or she cannot get out. In a comedy, we're laughing because his or her descent down is comical, and he or she will get back up in a funny way and life will go on. Okay? It's important to note that comic characters are frequently predictable in their behavior. You and I, as the audience, we kind of see that character's personality and we can kind of guess what he or she is going to do. But the plot is not predictable. The plot, we don't see sort of a reversal of fortune coming. We don't see that human weakness twisting something, okay? Comedy thrives on the unexpected. Now, happy endings in comedy are not always happy for everyone. That's important because, some characters might be, true antagonists / evil characters. And so obviously the play's not going to end well for him or her. Now, satire is a type of comedy, and satire exposes human folly, criticizes human conduct, and aims to correct it. So when you think about Stephen Colbert, when he had his late show last year, not his current show, but his old show, you could think of that as satire, right? He's making fun of the government. He's making fun of humanity. So satire, its job is to make fun of what's going on with humans and what we're doing wrong, exposing it in a funny way, and helping us realize our error so that maybe we can correct it. Okay? Now, comedy, it's funny, but there's still a lesson to be learned. Okay? The character's journey may involve a lot of tripping and falling and, going from poverty to wealth back to poverty, but all that whole journey, it still means something. So you don't want to get trapped in the laughter. You want to think, what is the laughter teaching me? Remember, a plot is a very basic beginning, middle, and end. And within the beginning, middle, and end, we have other things going on. At the beginning, we have this exposition, this background information, the setting and the routine. We get sort of the general presentation of the characters. And if you'll notice that we have a step ladder here, okay? It's a great way to think about a plot, that the plot rises up and then falls. So if we do the Cinderella, the first step ladder, the exposition, the background part, is when Cinderella lives the life of a slave until an invitation comes for the ball. So you see Cinderella in that background of the stepsisters and the mean stepmom and sort of her friendliness with the animals. And then the rising action, we start to see a shift. Cinderella tries but does not succeed in going to the ball until the fairy godmother comes and helps. So you see her desperately trying to get her chores done. And the animals get her dress ready, and then everything comes crash. She can't go because the stepsisters wreck the dress, and the stepmother says that she can't go. But then appears the fairy godmother, and now we have more rising action. Cinderella is at the ball and falls in love with the prince. She gets to the ball with the prince thanks to the fairy godmother. She goes in her carriage and she has this beautiful dress and she's dancing. Now the ultimate climax is when the prince tries on shoes on girls' feet, and ultimately he finds Cinderella's foot. So you see her run from the ball, you see her slipper fall, and you see the prince desperately trying to find her, and finally, the moment when he finally sees her come down the steps from being hidden in the house, and he puts it on her foot, and yay, it fits. Now, the end of the story is when she marries the prince and they live happily ever after. Okay, so the plot, it's just a beginning, middle, and end. And the beginning is just that background. The middle is just the rising action. The plot keeps shifting higher and higher. So there's more and more conflict. And the biggest conflict, what's the biggest moment that's going to make a turning point where the story is going to turn into happiness or turn into tragedy? That's the climax. Okay? Here's another graph on plot. You might like this one better, I'm not sure. Whichever graph you like. Again, we're still talking about a plot having a beginning, middle, and end. You have the background information, the rising action, the conflict or crisis. You have that ultimate, that climax, the top of the mountain, and then the falling action, and then the denouncement, sort of the ending. Okay, so you'll see all of these things, the description, the rising action, the conflict, and then the fall. That's all the time. And remember, a plot, the major point about plot is that with each, as the story moves from the beginning through the middle, there are more and more complications. The characters have to struggle. And your job as the reader/viewer is to figure out the moments of struggle. Where are those moments that the character is forced to make decisions and the plot changes to another decision? Okay? Complicated characters are crucial to any piece of literature, but particularly drama. Okay? Characters are companions of the plot. You don't have a story without a character, and you don't have a story without a plot. But in drama, the characters and the plot work together to move the story. Okay? So you have to pay attention to what the character is doing. What is the character saying? How is the character standing? Right? What is the character doing in the scene to help us understand the meaning? Okay. Now remember, we've already gone over this, but the protagonist and the antagonist. The protagonist is the main character. The antagonist is the character or force against which the protagonist struggles. Remember, the protagonist has to struggle. He or she has to have conflict, and that's sort of the fun part of the story. We are trying to watch this struggle and figure out what the character is trying to do within that struggle. Again, a tragic hero is kind of that noble character who exhibits heroism, but unfortunately, tragedy, usually tragedy of his or her own doing, crushes the character as well as everyone in the house. Okay, so a tragic hero causes the downfall of everybody. Again, character is crucial. We need to pay attention to who the characters are, what they're doing, what they're saying, what they are not saying, because the character pushes the story and helps us understand a bigger point about life. Dialogue refers to the speech in the play, the speech between characters. Always remember that dialogue helps reveal character and conflict. Conflict is crucial in drama, and the dialogue helps promote that conflict. Now, a monologue is a speech of one character. When a character sort of goes off and just speaks in a long tirade, that's a monologue. A soliloquy is a little bit different. A soliloquy is a speech given by a character as if he or she is alone. So there may be other characters on stage, but the character's standing there talking and as though no one else is around. Okay, and a soliloquy helps us understand what is inside that character's head, his emotions, his or her feelings. Okay, an aside is a comment made by a character directly to the audience while in the presence of other characters, but the other characters cannot hear. All right, there are certain shows on television that do asides a lot, where you'll see a character speak directly to the camera, and there are other characters in the background, but the other characters, quote unquote, cannot hear that character speak. Okay, an aside, you want to think of it as like you're whispering to someone who's not there, and you're acting like no one else can hear you. Now, dialogue, we are always looking for subtext when reading and listening to dialogue. Now, what is subtext? Subtext is what is not said, okay? Sort of that in between the lines. For example, let's pretend there's a character who has a glass in his or her hand, and he or she squeezes it so tightly it's starting to break, it's starting to shatter, and the character saying, "I'm not angry, what are you talking about?" Well, what's the subtext there? The character's breaking glass. I'm pretty sure he or she is angry, right? Another way to think of a subtext is, let's say you have two characters speaking. Let's say it's two women. And you have one woman telling the other character, "Well, did you hear what Jimmy said to me? He said that you are blank, blank, blank. You are an awful person, that your mother, you're not a good mother. You are a lazy person." And she's saying, "But that's what Jimmy said. I heard Jimmy say that about you. And I would never say that about you. That's what Jimmy said about you." Well, this character is speaking about what another character has said. Why? Is that character trying to be vicious? Is that character trying to make the other person feel bad? Is that person trying to cause a fight between two other characters? Is it a power play, right? Why is the character trying to spread information about this Jimmy, about what Jimmy said, right? What's the subtext? Staging represents all the visual details of the play. Now, this includes where the actors stand and their movements and all of their non-verbal cues. So if they're gripping their hair and pulling their hair out, what does that mean? If they're hiding behind a couch, what does that mean? Right? So also, staging includes the set, the costumes, the props, the lighting, and the sound effects. Okay? I had a teacher in college who once told me that when you introduce a gun on the stage, it better go off. So what does that mean? That means when a character is holding a prop, that prop better mean something and do something. Okay? A character doesn't hold a coffee mug for no reason. That coffee mug is either going to fall and break, the coffee's going to spill and burn, right? Something's got to happen to that coffee mug. Props are not just pretty things sitting around. They are meant to expose something about the character. Irony. Remember, irony is this contrast, this discrepancy between what is said and what is meant, or between what happens and what was expected to happen. So one type of irony is verbal irony. That comes from saying the opposite of what is meant. For example, if you have a character sitting on the couch and a cat comes and rubs up against that person's leg, and that person kind of cowers and kind of wants to get away from the cat, but he or she is saying, "I love cats." Well, we know that that's ironic because that person's body language is saying something completely different than what the words are. Situational irony is a discrepancy between what characters think is the case and what actually is the case. For example, let's say you have a character who is celebrating winning the lottery. Okay, and that person is so excited and jumping up and down and trying to buy things for other people and just so happy, but really, the lottery ticket was torn up. So it's just completely ironic, that celebration and the generosity, but really that person didn't win the lottery. Dramatic irony is very important, particularly in drama. Dramatic irony involves a discrepancy between what the characters know and what the reader or audience knows. So you want to think about it like you as the audience member, you know what's really going on. So if we go back to the lottery example, you saw another character rip up the lottery ticket in the scene prior. And so when the other character comes in and starts celebrating and offering to buy a new car for his best friend and jumping up and down and throwing confetti, you're laughing because you know that is about to turn ugly, because that character did not actually win the lottery. The lottery ticket is torn up. So when you see the lottery ticket torn up, but the other character didn't see it yet, that's dramatic irony. Okay, and dramatic irony is really important in drama, when the audience knows a little bit more than the character on stage. And here we are at theme again. Remember, theme designates the main idea or the point of the play. Now, let's not get too confused with theme and topic, Remember, a play could be about revenge or love or the American dream. But what are we saying about that? What is the main idea about that topic? Remember, in a play, the meaning is almost always implicit, bound up with and derivable from the play's whole structure, character interactions, dialogue, and staging. So a play, it uses all the elements of drama. The characters, the staging, the dialogue, it all works together to make a comment on the main idea. All right? So what are we supposed to learn? Remember, literature. Why do we read literature? Because literature exposes a human truth. We're trying to learn the meaning of life. What is this world all about? Who are we as human beings? And how does that piece of literature help us better understand ourselves and the world around us? We read to connect. We read to just help us understand this crazy thing called life. So we find the theme, and then we think about, what is the story saying about it? What is the lesson to be learned? Okay? I hope you enjoy drama.